Now, you just can't have a good story without a good antagonist. And I don't care what anyone says. It cannot just be an evil villain for the sake of being an evil villain because you need conflict in your story. There has to be purpose to it. I think some of the most compelling stories have some of the most interesting villains, in being that when you're considering the bad guy, the villain of your story, to remember that they are also a character or a person. And usually the villain does not know they are the villain of the story. In fact, the villain is the hero in their story. And I think that's something worth thinking about whenever you're writing a villain, is to give them their own, maybe warped moral compass. And they believe um, that they are doing right. They believe that they are correct um, in whatever they're trying to do and accomplish. Makes the villain way more believable. Um, and if you give them a compelling reason to be the way that they are and to believe the way that they believe, your reader will start to maybe even sympathize with the villain just a little bit, and maybe think that, oh, the hero is maybe taking it too far. I can understand why this villainous character would feel this way, and they are the way they are because of XYZ. And so the reader tries to justify these things in their mind and question whether or not the villain is actually a villain. I think some of the most compelling villains are that way. I could say, for example, let's take Avengers. Let's take Thanos. Thanos believed that the universe was overcrowded and led to, poverty and sickness, and so his crusade was to cut the population in half, so the surviving civilizations could flourish, and that nobody would be starving or hungry. Everybody would have a place to live. There'd be less struggle. Whenever you kind of think about that, okay, now, is mass genocide okay? No, I think we all know that it's not. But I think that the thoughts behind it are well thought out for the storyline, and you start to question, well, yeah, I mean, if there were less people in the world, there potentially could be less of those things. He's not 100% wrong in his line of thinking. He's wrong in his execution, is where the villain part of it comes in. But the reasoning, you could make a valid argument there. And I think that's what makes that character probably one of the most memorable villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, a lot of them are kind of just throwaway villains. It's a bad guy. It's a bad guy. It's somebody for the hero to punch. Thanos kind of had a mantra, if you will. He had a following. He had tons of people that believed the way that he believed. So he had followers. So I think that's really important to think of whenever you are thinking about an antagonist. They should have almost the same amount of character development as the hero of the story. You should spend equal amount of time on the antagonist as you do on the protagonist. And I think that's very important. Don't have a transparent bad guy. Give him some flavor, Give him a purpose just like the hero has. They both have to have purpose in order to have those purposes conflict. And that's the whole point of your story. And just like the hero, he will have, certain characters that are on his side of the story. Like we said, they have followers too, people who believe in their convictions. And so sometimes you have what I call is a contagonist. And the contagonist can kind of be in between the good side and the bad side sometimes. I always use Star Wars as an example because most people know Star Wars. So Luke Skywalker is the protagonist. We all know that. And in the first, I'm going to say, the first movies that were released, so be episode 4, it looks like Darth Vader is the villain of this story. And they kind of, play it out that way. But later on, we find out that there's somebody else that's actually pulling the strings on the dark side. We find Emperor Palpatine. Emperor Palpatine is actually the antagonist. He's the one with the idea, if you will, to take over the galaxy and, this, that, and the other. Darth Vader is kind of his minion. But what the antagonist does is kind of tempt the protagonist. If your antagonist has a really good purpose, then perhaps that contagonist will try to lure the protagonist to the dark side, just like Vader tries to lure Luke to the dark side. That's probably one of the best examples. If you want a different one, let's talk about Harry Potter. Professor Snape. He kind of plays both sides. He goes in between both sides. And so I could say that, he maybe is that in-between character between the light and the dark. And I think that that adds another layer of plot to your story. Gives you a little bit more flavor there if you have a antagonist character. The antagonist will usually have several minions. He will have his main minion that he will command. So, for example, so in Lord of the Rings, we'll say Saruman. He was one of the minions in Lord of the Rings, or the orc commander. He's a minion. You can add additional flavor to that by, just like with when we were talking about the protagonist side of the characters, that those characters don't always get along. Even on the antagonist side, those characters don't always get along either. Sometimes you have a minion who maybe thinks the boss has gone just a little too far. And so he may take action to correct that and start to doubt his loyalties to, his master that he's serving. So those are some things to consider whenever you're talking about an antagonist. So that is all I have basically for characters. We'll start to kind of work on plotting next time.